Resident Evil Survivor 2 on console is a complete disaster from start to finish. It's so bad in fact, that it makes the original Resident Evil Survivor look like an absolute masterpiece in comparison. And in this video, I want to run through 5 parts of Survivor 2's design which may have worked well in arcades, but definitely don't on console. The first of these issues is without doubt the game's story. In terms of plot, Survivor 2 loosely mirrors the first half of Resident Evil Code Veronica, with Claire Redfield and Steve Burnside attempting to escape Rockfort Island following an outbreak of the T-virus. And to do that, they have to shoot their way through all manner of monstrosities, including zombies, hunters, and eventually a tyrant. And that's about as deep as the story goes. There are cutscenes at the beginning and end of each level, but they are incredibly brief and feature no voice acting whatsoever. That might sound like a strange omission, but it does make sense given the game's arcade origins. Arcades can often be loud places, which could make dialogue difficult to actually hear, and so leaving it out of Survivor 2 does kind of make sense, especially given the level of quality found in some other arcade horror titles.
Man committed a sin, disturbing the life cycle of nature. The original sin that man is responsible to protect the life cycle.
Not only would it be far less noticeable in an arcade as opposed to on console, but it would also save money by avoiding the need to bring Code Veronica's voice actors back to record additional dialogue. And given that arcade games are usually short compared to most console titles, and players are standing in front of a cabinet rather than sitting comfortably at home, long bouts of exposition aren't as necessary compared to more traditional Resident Evil titles featured on consoles. Unfortunately, however, the game did feature on console, and the absolute bare minimum has been done to make the story any more engaging. Apart from the addition of files which can be collected by picking up gems scattered throughout each level, the last of which reveals that everything was in fact a dream. Yes, everything that takes place during Survivor 2 is a dream Claire had after escaping the island. In Code Veronica, she was joined during her escape by her brother Chris, but in Survivor 2, he's replaced by Steve. It actually makes for a fairly sad tale, with Claire managing to escape the island, but without the man she had seemingly begun to fall for. Ultimately, all that's left of him is a dream. This could have actually made for a cliched but relatively somber ending if it was included as an added scene before or after the credits, with the relationship between the two also a little more fleshed out. But it wasn't, which is a shame I suppose. Instead, what little story is included within the main game is exactly what you'd expect from an arcade experience. Brief, to the point, and designed to get players back into the action as quickly as possible. If you're expecting a retelling of the first half of Code Veronica but in first person, you've definitely come to the wrong place. The second big issue Survivor 2 suffers from because of its arcade heritage is the way it controls. In arcades, the game was controlled using guns mounted on the cabinet, and on console there's a choice between using Namco's GunCon or a controller, with a controller being the method I used and the one I'd imagine most others did too. There's clearly been some inspiration taken from PC first-person shooters, with the D-pad controlling forward and backward movement as well as strafing, while left and right shoulder buttons control turning, and it makes for a terrible experience. Getting stuck on walls or corners becomes a regular occurrence, and it's also incredibly difficult to adjust to any enemy which ends up behind you, something Survivor 2 seemingly relishes in making happen fairly often. A hunter, bandersnatch or similar will inevitably perform some kind of jumping or lunging attack, and before you even have time to say, "Why on earth am I playing this game?" you'll be getting hit from behind. From there, there's really only 2 courses of action: run away while trying to avoid any other enemies in the vicinity, or turn to face them and fight. Turning to face them sounds like it would be the easiest option, and usually that would be the case, except characters unfortunately have the turning speed of an elephant, which makes the less desirable option of moving to another position often the better choice. This room featuring a lone bandersnatch is a good example. You enter the room, it immediately pulls itself towards you no matter what you do, and you then have to make a choice. Turn to face it and attack but risk being hit yourself, or move forward, turn very slowly to face it, and then attack from a safer distance. Even monsters getting up close can cause real issues due to you only being able to manually aim horizontally. Survivor 2 features a lock-on feature to deal with verticality, which can work fairly well for zombies lying on the floor, but hitting anything beyond that is down to luck as much as anything else. Sometimes the game will lock onto enemies with a certain degree of grace, if you're lucky, and at other times it feels like the crosshair will aim at anything but the monster in question. This becomes especially irritating when the game then pulls the camera down so the enemy is the only thing you can see, which often leaves the camera desperately trying to stay focused on the monster while you attempt to relocate. To be fair to Capcom, they have tried to alleviate some of the issues through level design and enemy placement. Most of the time environments are fairly cramped and enemies will appear in front of you 90% of the time, but it's still not enough to solve the underlying problems. Actually, I call them problems, but I suspect they're a core part of Survivor 2's design. Remember, this is an arcade game created with the aim of keeping players pumping the cabinet full of change, and so while the issues with its controls and enemies managing to get themselves into places where they're a nightmare to actually hit makes for an awful experience on console, in arcades it was no doubt an invaluable mechanic for ensuring players lost lives and had to continue feeding the machine. Third on my list of reasons why Survivor 2 is a console catastrophe is its timer. As you will have no doubt noticed in most of the footage you've seen so far, there is a rather large timer constantly displayed at the top of the screen. The timer starts counting down at the beginning of each level, and when it only has a minute remaining, a fairly annoying alarm and voiceover will also begin playing. If the timer expires without you managing to reach the exit, Nemesis, who never featured in Code Veronica, will then promptly appear, because why not? Once this happens, he will then begin hunting you down, appearing in rooms not long after you've entered them with one goal in mind: to kill you. On console, there's really no reason this timer should be included at all. I think Survivor 2 would function much better with the mechanic removed entirely, giving players time to comfortably explore what limited side areas are on offer, and extending the game's sub 1 hour runtime by a few minutes. It can be changed in the options menu to make it more forgiving, but I wonder how many people even realised that this was a choice they could make. Looking at Survivor 2 as an arcade game on the other hand, there's some fairly sound logic behind the timer. It pushes you to rush through things and potentially make mistakes, and if the timer does run out, which I imagine it will for many, it allows a new mechanic to be introduced, which is again designed to part arcade players from their hard-earned cash, especially given Nemesis often enjoys appearing from behind and killing you in one hit, and has no qualms about killing your partner character either. And it's the partner system which comes in at number 4 on my list. In Survivor 2, you're given the choice between playing as Claire or Steve, with the other character becoming an AI companion. The AI is terrible for 2 reasons. For starters, it often gets itself in a bit of a muddle and can't quite work out what to do, this clip being a great example of how bad the partner system and Survivor 2 in general can be. Steve just stands there and does nothing. He even crosses his arms as if there's no way he could possibly help in this situation. And God forbid Nemesis enters the level, as your partner will almost definitely decide to stand nearby and get themselves killed. Which brings me on to the second issue, which is how hard the game is without your partner on normal difficulty. They provide an amazing distraction, especially when it comes to bosses, and good luck doing anywhere near as well when they're dead, because you most likely won't. With 2 people playing together in an arcade, these problems are gone, but playing on console, which is single player only, the partner AI can sometimes be utterly infuriating. Which brings us to our final issue, Survivor 2's difficulty. At the game's default setting, it is a very, very tough game. Even regular zombies can take off huge chunks of health, and with only 3 continues to use, the best I ever managed to do was reach the end of the 4th of 5 stages. A lot of that difficulty is down to the factors I've already mentioned, such as the controls, the timer and the partner AI. But Survivor 2 is also incredibly unfair in quite a noticeable manner quite a lot of the time. The game loves nothing more than positioning enemies extremely close to you when entering a room, giving you little time to adjust to what you're facing. The bosses swing wildly between being too easy with a partner and being way too hard without one. And worst of all, there are a number of moments I'm fairly certain were designed specifically to cause inescapable damage to arcade players in order to use up their lives. Here's another example featuring a Bandersnatch. As far as I can tell, there's absolutely no way to avoid being hit, which is incredibly unfair. In an arcade, sure, I might just shrug it off, but playing on console, it's glaringly obvious how ridiculously unavoidable it is. Here's another one, zombie dog hidden behind a load of crates, which you won't notice until it's nearly in your face, and again is very difficult to avoid. And there's definitely more than a few other examples where that came from. To summarise, Resident Evil Survivor 2 is awful, don't play it. Unless you are the most hardcore fan of the series, you will get no enjoyment from the experience, and even if you are, like me, you'll most likely still come away disappointed. If you want an old school Resident Evil experience in first person, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but why not give the first Survivor a try? Because I'll tell you what, having recently played both, that game really doesn't seem so bad now in comparison. Or if you fancy something of a higher quality, the first half of Resident Evil 7 might just scratch that itch as well. But Gun Survivor 2, stay away, stay very far away. Thanks for watching the video, and do consider liking, subscribing and leaving a comment if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.